I still remember the smell of roasted chicken that night. My mother's favorite dinner, one she usually made when there was good news. I took it as a sign. I'd just received my acceptance letter from the college I'd dreamed about since freshman year. My hands shook as I placed the envelope on the table, the official crest glinting under the dining light. I thought they'd be proud. I thought they'd see what I'd achieved, and realize how hard I'd worked for it. My father didn't even look up from his plate. My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin and said, "That's nice, dear." I laughed nervously, waiting for the moment they'd ask about next steps, dorms, tuition, textbooks. Instead, silence stretched so long that the clock's ticking filled the air. Finally, my father leaned back, eyes flat. "We've been talking," he said. "Your mother and I think it's time you learn independence." I didn't understand. I blinked, confused. "Independence?" He nodded as if delivering wisdom. "You're 18. You've had everything handed to you. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet." My mother folded her hands neatly, like this was a board meeting, not my life. "We've decided we won't be covering your college expenses," she said calmly. "You'll appreciate it later. It will make you stronger." The words didn't register at first. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Wait, what? You paid for Ryan's entire degree. You even bought him a car." My father's jaw tightened. "Ryan earned that. He followed the plan we set. You chose your own path. If you want that fancy school, you figure it out." My stomach twisted. "You mean I have to pay for everything myself?" He nodded once. "Yes, you'll thank us later." That phrase lodged itself in my chest like a thorn. My mother smiled faintly, as though she'd just done me a kindness. "You're smart," she said. "You'll find a way." I looked between them, hoping one of them would blink, show guilt, anything. Instead, my brother waltzed in, wearing his college hoodie, holding the car keys they'd gifted him for making the family proud. He patted my shoulder. "Guess it's your turn to grow up, sis." Everyone laughed. Except me, dinner carried on like nothing had happened. The smell of roasted chicken made me nauseous. I stared at my plate, the food cold, the air heavy. My father started talking about his golf plans for the weekend. My mother complimented the sauce. My brother told them about his upcoming fraternity trip. My acceptance letter lay on the table like a silent accusation. I tried to speak, to remind them of all the nights I'd stayed up studying, the scholarships I'd chased, the way I'd worked part-time already. But no one wanted to hear it. My father said, "Don't start crying. You're not a child anymore." My mother murmured, "We're doing this out of love." Love. That word made something inside me break. I excused myself, walked to my room, and closed the door quietly so they wouldn't have the satisfaction of hearing it slam. My acceptance letter trembled in my hands. I read it again and again, as if maybe the words would change, as if it could still mean something. My eyes fell on the line congratulating me for being among the few selected. I had done everything right. I had earned it. And still, it wasn't enough. In that moment, I realized something. Their love came with conditions. My worth was negotiable. I wasn't their pride. I was their lesson. The next morning, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. My father said, "She'll last a month, maybe 2. Then she'll crawl back, and we'll see if she's learned humility." My mother laughed softly, as though the idea amused her. I felt the tears threaten, but I swallowed them back. Humility? No. What I felt was rage, cold, sharp, and clean. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't speak. I waited until the house went still, until I could hear only the faint hum of the refrigerator and my heartbeat in my ears. Then I opened my closet, pulled out my old duffel bag, and filled it with what little I owned. 2 pairs of jeans, a few shirts, a notebook, my laptop, and the acceptance letter they refused to believe in. As I zipped the bag shut, I took one last look around my room, the posters, the chipped desk, the bed I'd cried in countless times. I thought about every lecture on discipline, every time they'd compared me to my brother, every conditional "we love you" they'd offered. And then I smiled, a small, bitter smile that didn't feel like defeat but like awakening. That night, I packed a single bag and left home without a plan. The first night in my new home, I sat on a mattress that wasn't really mine, in a room that smelled faintly of mold and old carpet cleaner. The walls were thin enough to hear my roommate's phone buzzing through them, and the window didn't close all the way. Still, when I looked at my duffel bag in the corner, the same one I'd packed in silence that night, I felt a strange mixture of fear and freedom. The rent was cheap because everything else was broken. The faucet leaked, the bathroom light flickered like a dying candle, and the kitchen had exactly 2 bowls and a single pot that someone had burned ramen in years ago. That pot became my entire kitchen. Every night I'd boil water, tear open a packet of instant noodles, and pretend that the steam rising from the pot was something more. Comfort, maybe. During the day, I worked. First at a cafe where the manager thought flexible hours meant I should cover everyone's shifts. Then as a tutor for high school kids whose parents paid more per hour than I made in a day. On weekends, I cleaned apartments for couples who left lipstick on glasses and shoes by the door, like silent proof that they had someone waiting for them. I scrubbed their sinks until my fingers cracked. I smiled through it, telling myself this was independence. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry over my parents. But every payday, when I counted crumpled bills under that flickering light, I'd hear my father's voice. "You'll thank us later." I wanted to scream back, "For what? For turning me into a stranger you can brag about surviving without you?" But they wouldn't have heard me. I tried to keep up appearances. When old school friends texted, asking about college life, I said things like, "It's tough but rewarding," or "Just figuring things out, you know?" I'd smile at my cracked phone screen, pretending I was too busy studying to hang out. They believed me, because people always believe what they want to, and no one wants to see failure up close. Nights were the hardest. I'd scroll through social media, pretending not to care as my brother posted pictures of beach trips, fancy dinners, and his new car, the same car my parents had signed the papers for. "Proud of my parents for believing in me," one caption read. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. They believed in him, always had. His success was their success. My struggle was, what? A moral lesson? Sometimes, when I was tutoring a student who complained about too much homework, I'd imagine telling them how lucky they were to have someone who paid their tuition. I wanted to shake them, to make them see what I'd learned too early. That love can be conditional, and family can weaponize it. But I never said it. I just smiled and corrected their grammar. The worst part wasn't the hunger, or exhaustion, or the nights my shoes were too wet from walking home in the rain. It was how invisible I felt, like I could vanish tomorrow and no one in my family would notice. My mother would probably assume I'd learned humility, and my father might call it character building. One night I came home from the cafe so tired I could barely lift my legs up the stairs. My tips were short. A family had left me a single dollar on a $60 bill with a note that said, "Smile more." I dropped the apron on the floor, opened a packet of noodles, and sat staring at the boiling water. I thought about calling home, about hearing my mother's voice. But then I remembered that the last time we'd spoken, she'd said, "Don't waste your energy resenting us. Use it to better yourself. Better myself." I let out a laugh that turned into something closer to a sob, because I was bettering myself, just not in the way they'd imagined. They'd taught me how to survive by refusing to help. They'd taught me what being unwanted felt like, and how to live with that echoing inside me. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I learned to make $10 stretch over 3 days. I learned to nap in the campus library between tutoring sessions. I learned to smile through rejection and carry my own pain like a secret badge of honor. But every time I saw my brother post another photo, champagne in hand, surrounded by friends, our parents commenting, "So proud of you," something inside me hardened. It wasn't just jealousy. It was clarity. They had made me invisible so that he could shine. They'd called it independence, but it was abandonment disguised as wisdom. And the cruelest part? They expected me to thank them for it someday. I began to write things down in a notebook, things I wanted to remember. The promises I'd make to myself, that I'd never beg them again, that I'd become someone they couldn't ignore. That one day, when success finally came, I'd make sure they felt what I had felt, unseen, irrelevant, replaceable. The noodles had gone soggy by the time I realized I was crying. I pushed the bowl aside and whispered to the empty room, "I'll thank you later. Just wait." It was the first time the words didn't hurt. They burned. By the middle of my second semester, I was running on fumes. My grades were slipping, my rent was late again, and I'd started skipping meals to stretch what little I had. Every morning I'd wake up and tell myself, just one more day. You can survive one more day. But by nightfall, I'd stare at my reflection in the window and wonder if any of this was worth it. Independence had started to taste less like freedom and more like failure. I remember the day I almost gave up. It was raining, and I was soaked from a double shift at the cafe. My shoes squeaked against the hallway floor as I handed in an essay I'd written half asleep between tutoring sessions. When Professor Graham handed it back a week later, I expected red ink, the academic equivalent of disappointment. Instead, there was a note at the top. "See me after class." I thought I was in trouble. But when everyone else left, he just looked at me with this quiet, knowing expression. "You've got a mind that doesn't quit," he said, "but your eyes look like someone who's fighting more than deadlines." I froze. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not in my family, not at my jobs, nowhere. I wanted to brush it off, make a joke, but the lump in my throat made it impossible. He asked if I was all right. I said yes. He didn't believe me. Instead of pushing, he said, "If you ever need help, the kind you can't ask for, my door's open." That conversation changed everything. Over the next few weeks, he'd ask small questions, not about my grades, but about me. He noticed when I started skipping lunches. He noticed when I looked too tired to focus. One afternoon, he pulled me aside again and said, "You're doing too much alone. Let's fix that." At first I resisted. I wasn't used to people offering help without expecting something in return, but he guided me through scholarship forms I didn't even know existed. We spent hours rewriting my personal statement. He said, "You've been taught to survive, not to ask. There's a difference." Those words hit deeper than I wanted them to. When the acceptance email for the scholarship arrived, I read it 5 times, convinced it was a mistake. It wasn't just the money, though that meant food, rent, and fewer panic attacks. It was what it symbolized. Someone believed I was worth investing in. For the first time, I wasn't being told to toughen up or learn independence. I was being told, "You belong here." Professor Graham also introduced me to a part-time research position, a remote project that paid decently. It was mostly data analysis for a social behavior study, tedious at times, but steady. More importantly, it didn't involve scrubbing floors or smiling through customer insults. I could work from my tiny apartment, headphones in, coffee by my side, and actually breathe. As the weeks went on, I started feeling lighter. I'd wake up with purpose, not dread. My grades improved. I began to laugh again. Real laughter, the kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. My professor never pried about my family, but I think he understood more than I said. Once he told me, "Sometimes the people meant to protect us teach us resilience instead. Don't let that make you bitter. Let it make you precise." That line stayed with me. I started walking differently, speaking differently. Not in arrogance, but in quiet confidence. The same people who used to overlook me started asking for help in study groups. Professors remembered my name. I was no longer surviving on scraps of hope. I was building something real. Still at night, I'd think about my parents, about how they'd never know what it felt like to have someone believe in me, how they'd dismissed me like I was disposable. The bitterness didn't vanish, but it evolved. I stopped needing their approval. Instead, I started dreaming of independence that wasn't lonely, the kind built from self-worth, not punishment. One evening, after grading papers together, Professor Graham said, "You remind me of someone who's going to outgrow every room she walks into." I smiled, not sure how to reply. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I believed it might be true. I didn't know it then, but that part-time job would change my entire life. The transition happened quietly, almost accidentally, like a door left slightly open that I decided to walk through. The research project I'd been working on caught the attention of one of the company partners funding the study. I didn't even know my name had reached that level until I got an email inviting me to discuss internship opportunities. I thought it was a prank. Me, the girl who once cried over a broken microwave, being considered by a tech startup that everyone on campus wanted to work for? Impossible. But it wasn't. The office was nothing like the dingy cafe kitchens or the cluttered apartments I'd grown used to. It smelled like espresso and ambition. Everyone moved with purpose, typing, talking, dreaming big. When I walked in for the interview, wearing a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit, I could feel my pulse in my throat. Yet somehow I didn't crumble. The woman interviewing me asked about the data models I'd built for Professor Graham's research, and when I explained my process, her eyebrows lifted. "You taught yourself Python?" she asked. I nodded. She smiled. "You're hired." That was it. No grand moment, no applause, just quiet validation. But that night, walking home under streetlights, I cried. Not the kind of tears that come from pain, but the kind that release years of exhaustion. The internship paid just enough to cover my rent without constant panic, and the cafeteria food was free, which, after 2 years of instant noodles, felt like fine dining. I still worked hard, harder than I ever had before. Days blurred into nights. I'd stay in the office after hours, reading about digital marketing, user analytics, and product design. I wanted to learn everything. Sleep became optional. Progress became addictive. At first, my coworkers barely noticed me. I was quiet, head down, always typing. But gradually, they started asking for my input. I found bugs no one else caught, simplified code others had overcomplicated. And once, during a late-night brainstorming session, I offered an idea that ended up shaping a new product feature. The next day, the CEO himself stopped by my desk and said, "You're the quiet storm, aren't you?" I froze, remembering that phrase, the same one Professor Graham used. Something inside me lit up. With each success, a small piece of the old me fell away. The scared girl scraping together bus fare, the one who hid her hunger behind fake smiles. In her place grew someone focused, deliberate, almost unstoppable. I started dressing differently, speaking up in meetings, holding eye contact. I was no longer trying to survive. I was learning how to thrive. Sometimes, during lunch breaks, I'd sit by the big office windows overlooking the city and watch people rushing below. I'd think about how, not so long ago, I'd been one of them. Tired, invisible, lost. Now, my reflection in the glass looked like someone I didn't fully recognize but wanted to know. The company gave me opportunities to attend workshops and conferences. I networked, studied business models, learned to pitch ideas. The learning curve was steep, but the fear that once paralyzed me had turned into fuel. I didn't need approval from my parents anymore. Every project I completed, every compliment I earned, was its own quiet rebellion. My professor still checked in sometimes. When I told him about the internship, he said, "See? Storms don't always destroy. Sometimes they clear the path." I smiled at that. Maybe I'd needed the destruction to rebuild. Maybe the distance from my family had made room for a new kind of foundation. One built from my own strength. Months passed. The ramen nights became rare. My meals came from company dinners or late-night takeout ordered after finishing a big project. The exhaustion was still there, but it felt different now. Chosen, purposeful. When I collapsed into bed at 3 a.m., it wasn't from despair, but from drive. One night, after a big product launch, the CEO called the interns into the conference room and raised a toast. "To the dreamers," he said. "Especially the ones who started with nothing." I felt my chest tighten. Because for the first time, I wasn't ashamed of starting with nothing. I was proud of it. I looked around the sleek glass walls, the glowing city lights, the polished faces of people who'd begun noticing me not as the intern, but as someone to watch. The girl who'd once scrubbed floors now stood in a boardroom, ideas on the whiteboard, confidence in her voice. Hope had replaced hunger. Determination had silenced doubt, and the quiet storm was only just beginning to rise. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the peak. It was just the climb. Graduation day was supposed to feel like an ending, a clean, proud conclusion to the chaos of the years before. But as I zipped up my gown that morning, in the same tiny apartment that had once echoed with loneliness, I realized it wasn't an ending at all. It was a quiet declaration. I made it, even without you. I'd earned every step that brought me here. The sleepless nights, the rejections, the years of stretching $1 until it broke. The girl who'd eaten instant noodles under flickering lights was now graduating with honors. I should have felt proud, I did, but there was an ache under the pride, one I couldn't quite shake. My classmates were surrounded by families, bouquets, laughter, proud tears, parents taking photos, shouting names when diplomas were called. I stood among them, smiling, pretending not to notice the empty seats reserved under my name. My parents had called the night before, their voices casual, distant. "We can't make it tomorrow," my mother said. "Your brother's engagement dinner is the same weekend. You understand, right? Understand?" I wanted to laugh. Of course I understood. I'd been understanding all my life. I told her it was fine, that I was happy for him. She thanked me and hung up. That was it. No, we're proud of you. No congratulations. Just silence where love should have been. As I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, I felt a surge of emotion I hadn't expected. The applause from strangers felt louder, fuller, like the universe was trying to fill the void they'd left. My professor was in the front row, smiling, clapping like I was his own child. That meant more than anything. After the ceremony, my friends gathered with their families, taking pictures, planning dinners. One of them asked, "Where are your parents sitting?" I just smiled and said, "They couldn't make it." She looked sorry for me, but I wasn't. Not anymore. I'd stopped expecting them to show up for me a long time ago. I walked home alone, my cap in one hand, heels in the other, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. For the first time, the loneliness didn't sting. It steadied me. I'd built my life without them, brick by brick, heartbreak by heartbreak. I didn't need their applause. My success was my own applause now. That night, I checked my email before bed, mostly out of habit. There it was, a message with the subject line, "Offer letter." I clicked it open, heart pounding. The salary figure made me blink twice, triple what my brother earned at his comfortable job. The same brother who'd been their golden child, the symbol of pride they flaunted to everyone. I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face, not out of spite, not entirely. But because this was poetic, the daughter they'd called too dependent was now more successful than the son they'd built their world around. I set the laptop aside and looked out the window, the city lights glittering below. I thought of my father's voice echoing from years ago. "You'll thank us later." Maybe I would. But not for the reasons he imagined. I didn't thank them for the lessons or the pain. I thanked them silently for walking away, because it forced me to become someone who didn't need them. The next day, I hosted a small graduation dinner. Just friends, my professor, and a few coworkers. We laughed, toasted to survival, to new beginnings. I didn't invite my parents. I didn't even think about it. And the cruelest part? They didn't even notice. The move felt like shedding my old skin. I packed what little I owned, a few clothes, my laptop, a plant that had somehow survived every winter with me, and took a one-way train out of the city. The skyline faded behind me like a memory I was finally ready to outgrow. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything that had defined me, the pain, the hunger, the quiet desperation, stayed behind in that city. What I carried forward was sharper, focus, ambition, restraint. The new city was louder, faster, unapologetically ambitious. Perfect. I rented a small apartment near the company's office. Not luxurious, but bright, clean, mine. Every morning I walked through glass doors into an office that hummed with energy. My badge clicked against the scanner. My reflection flashed in the lobby mirror. No longer the tired student or the broke waitress. I was becoming someone new, someone unrecognizable even to myself. At first, the workload was overwhelming. Deadlines, presentations, clients with impossible expectations. I loved it. I thrived on the pressure, the long hours, the sharp pace of it all. Each project felt like a personal test, and I passed every one. When others clocked out at 5, I stayed, learning, coding, planning. It wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about building something that could never be taken away. Within a year, my work spoke louder than any introduction could. I was promoted twice, led teams, handled projects that once terrified me. I learned how to negotiate, how to command a room without raising my voice. I dressed differently too, not to impress, but to armor myself. Tailored suits replaced thrift store sweaters. Confidence became my favorite accessory. Sometimes I'd catch myself in meeting reflections, standing beside executives twice my age, and remember how it felt to be the girl cleaning tables for tips. The contrast hit me like lightning every time. My whole life had turned into a before and after I hadn't even planned for. Rejection emails used to be my reality. Now, they were what I sent out. Polite, professional, final. I treated everyone kindly but firmly. I never bragged. I never posted my success online. There was a strange satisfaction in anonymity, in knowing that my parents probably still believed I was getting by, while in truth, I was outpacing people who'd once pitied me. Independence, the word they had thrown at me like a punishment, had become my weapon. My shield, my superpower. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd cut me off to make me stronger, thinking it would humble me. Instead, it refined me. Every decision I made, from my career moves to my investments, carried a kind of cold precision. I didn't chase luxury, but I did plan for longevity. I started saving, investing in small stocks, then real estate. Quiet wins, no announcements, no need for validation. Once a colleague invited me to a networking gala. The room sparkled with champagne and polished egos. I stood there, listening to people discuss family legacies and inherited businesses, and smiled quietly to myself. They didn't know that I had built everything from scraps. Every dollar I'd earned, every title I'd gained, had been carved from stubborn survival. When the company's PR team asked to feature me in an article about rising young executives, I almost declined. But then I thought of the girl I used to be, the one who thought invisibility was permanent. I agreed, but on one condition: no personal details. No family history, just my work. The article came out with the headline, "The Quiet Architect of Success." It made me laugh. Quiet, yes, but not small. After that, new opportunities arrived faster than I could process them. Invitations to speak at conferences, consulting offers, collaborations. I accepted selectively, carefully. I didn't want fame, just freedom. Freedom from proving anything to anyone. My apartment changed too. I upgraded to a place with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Some nights I'd stand by the glass, barefoot, wine in hand, watching the city lights blink like constellations. I thought of the girl sitting on the floor years ago, slurping instant noodles, whispering promises to herself. I wanted to tell her, "You did it. You made it without them." And yet, beneath the satisfaction there was something gentler. Gratitude. Not toward my parents, but toward the pain. Because without it, I wouldn't have learned the kind of independence that doesn't just survive, it thrives. I stayed off social media completely. No updates, no proof. My success was my secret. Every new milestone felt like a quiet act of rebellion against the version of me they once pitied. I didn't need applause, likes, or validation. My silence was louder than their neglect ever was. Sometimes coworkers would ask, "What drives you?" I'd just smile and say, "Habit." Because how could I explain that my entire life had been built on the habit of being underestimated? Years passed this way, calm, focused, quietly victorious. I became the person people turned to for advice, the one who made things look effortless. But every now and then, I'd catch myself tracing the old scars, not physical, but emotional, and realize how far I'd traveled from that broken 18-year-old who once begged for love disguised as approval. The irony was perfect. The independence they forced on me had become my foundation. It was no longer the reason I suffered. It was the reason I soared. It started with a headline. I wasn't even looking for it. It found me. I was scrolling through a finance site between meetings when I saw my father's name, printed in bold beneath the words, "Local business tycoon faces bankruptcy." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But the photo, that familiar, confident smirk he always wore for the cameras, confirmed it wasn't. My father's empire, the one he used to boast about at every dinner, was crumbling. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at the screen, remembering the way he'd said, "You'll thank us later." Maybe this was later. Out of curiosity, or maybe habit, I searched my brother's name next. Another headline appeared. Promising startup fails to secure funding. Founders in debt. His photo looked nothing like the bright, polished man from his Instagram post years ago. His smile was thinner, his eyes hollow. It was surreal, watching their perfect world unravel through pixels. The same people who once lectured me about responsibility and discipline had lost everything they built. Their house, the one I used to scrub floors in, the one I left behind with a single bag, was listed on a foreclosure site. I stared at the image of the driveway, the front porch, the garden I used to water when my mother yelled about pulling my weight. It looked smaller now, emptier, like it finally understood loneliness. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel pity. What I felt was silence, a strange, steady quiet inside me, the kind that comes after years of storms. That afternoon, as I walked home from work, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I'd long ago learned that peace often meant unanswered calls. But something made me look. "Can we talk?" It was signed Mom. My steps slowed. I hadn't seen that name on my screen in nearly a decade. The last message she'd sent me was years ago. A simple, "Congratulations," when I graduated, probably out of politeness. Now, after 9 silent years, she was asking to talk. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I sat on a park bench nearby, scrolling up, realizing there were no messages before it. Just blank space, as like the distance between us. Then another text came through. "Your father isn't well." 4 words. Just 4, but they landed heavier than I expected. I read them again, then again. Not well. What did that even mean? Sick? Desperate? Guilty? Or maybe just finally human? A small part of me wanted to know. Another part, the part that had cried in dorm hallways and skipped meals to save tuition, didn't care. For 9 years, they hadn't needed me. For 9 years, I had learned how not to need them. But I couldn't deny what stirred beneath the surface: curiosity. Not forgiveness, I wasn't that naive, but a deep, aching curiosity. How did the untouchable family that once looked down on me fall so low that they reached out first? As I walked back to my apartment, the city lights blurred around me. Every honk, every neon sign, every rush of people felt distant. My mind was replaying a single memory. My father's voice that day at the dining table. "You'll thank us later." Maybe he was right. Maybe I did thank them, just not in the way he imagined. Because the woman I'd become, calm, unshakable, self-made, was born from their rejection. Still, the message lingered on my screen like a ghost. "Can we talk?" The old me would have answered immediately, desperate for their approval. But this me, the one forged through hunger and silence, took her time. I poured myself a glass of water, sat by the window, and let the phone buzz once more. Another message appeared. "Please, it's important." I stared at it until the words blurred. It was strange how quickly the roles had reversed. Once I was the one begging them to listen, to care, to help. Now they were the ones reaching out. Not from pride, but from need. 9 years ago, I'd walked away from that house with a single bag and no plan. I had nothing, no safety net, no support, no family. They taught me what it meant to survive without them. Now, they were the ones standing at the edge of losing everything. I locked my phone, sat back, and exhaled. For the first time in 9 years. They needed me. It was a Monday morning like any other. Coffee steaming on my desk, sunlight cutting through the blinds, the city humming below. My assistant Claire knocked softly before stepping in. "Ma'am," she said, holding a file, "Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds are here for the partnership proposal." For a heartbeat, I froze. The name hit harder than any memory. Reynolds, my family's name, my parents' name. I repeated it in my head, half expecting I'd misheard. but Claire continued, unaware of the earthquake she'd just started. They said it's urgent. Something about a potential merger to save a family business. My pulse slowed, not quickened. I smiled faintly. Tell them I'll be there in 5. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all these years, after everything they'd taken from me, they were here, walking into my world, needing my help. I took a moment to gather myself, smoothing my jacket, steadying the small tremor in my chest. The girl who once begged for a chance to be seen was about to walk into a room where she'd be the one everyone looked up to. When I opened the conference room door, time folded in on itself. My father sat rigid at the far end of the long glass table, his once commanding posture slightly wilted. My mother clutched her purse, her eyes darting nervously around the minimalist space. And my brother, the golden child, the untouchable, kept his gaze fixed on the floor. For a second, none of us spoke. My heels clicked softly against the floor as I walked in, every step echoing the years of silence that had separated us. Then my father looked up, his lips parting in disbelief. You... I gave him a polite, almost detached smile. Good morning, I said. I understand you wanted to discuss a partnership proposal? My mother's eyes glistened. You work here? She asked, her voice trembling. I sat down across from them, folding my hands neatly. No, I said evenly. I own this company. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. My father blinked as if trying to process words that made no sense. His hand, once so steady, the hand that used to sign my report cards, my brother's tuition checks, trembled on the table. My brother's jaw tightened, his pride visibly cracking. This is your company? My father finally said, his tone teetering between disbelief and denial. Yes, I replied simply. I founded it 6 years ago. I turned to Claire, who stood by the door with her tablet. Could you please bring the proposal documents? She nodded and left. The room felt smaller now, like the air itself was holding its breath. My father tried to gather himself, straightening his tie. We didn't realize, he said, glancing awkwardly at my mother. I could have mocked him. I could have asked if he realized how it felt when his daughter ate instant noodles for months while his son drove a new car. But I didn't. That wasn't who I was anymore. My revenge wasn't about shouting or gloating. It was about calm control. So, I said softly, leaning back in my chair. You're here about funding, right? My father swallowed, his voice low. Yes, our family business is in trouble. We're hoping for a chance to rebuild. The irony of hearing chance from his mouth nearly made me laugh. For a moment, I let the silence stretch. It wasn't cruel, it was closure. Every flicker of discomfort on his face, every nervous glance between them, felt like a mirror turned back in time. My mother finally spoke. We didn't know, sweetheart, she whispered, her eyes pleading. We didn't know you'd come this far. I met her gaze, and for the first time I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like their child begging for approval. I felt like someone who'd written her own story. It's funny, I said, my voice steady. You once told me being independent would make me strong. You were right. I just never imagined that strength would bring us back here. Like this. My brother shifted in his seat, still silent. He'd always been the confident one, the one who never doubted his place. Now, his silence spoke louder than any apology. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, filling the room with rhythm, like counting down to something inevitable. I watched them, not with hatred, but with clarity. I saw the exhaustion in their faces, the humility that life had finally forced upon them. And strangely, I felt peaceful. After all these years, the roles had reversed. I closed the file in front of me, straightened my posture, and smiled faintly. Let's discuss your proposal. So, you're here about funding, right? The room felt heavier than before, though no one had moved. My father's voice cracked as he began explaining their situation, the failing contracts, the investors who'd pulled out, the mounting debts. He spoke like a man trying to cling to the last remnants of dignity. My mother added small, trembling details between his pauses, her words spilling out like apologies disguised as explanations. I listened in silence. Years ago, I would have jumped in with ideas, questions, a desperate urge to help. But this time, I let their words settle like dust. Quiet, revealing, inevitable. My father's pride, once his armor, now seemed to suffocate him. He couldn't meet my eyes for more than a few seconds. Every time he tried, I saw the reflection of the man who'd once said, "You'll thank us later," and maybe in a twisted way, I did. "I'm sorry it's come to this," he said finally, his hands folded tightly on the table. We made some mistakes." My mother reached out across the table, her voice breaking. "We should have been there for you. We didn't realize how much it would hurt you, what we said." I stopped her gently. "You don't need to explain," I said. "You were very clear back then. You wanted me to learn independence." My father's eyes lifted, confusion and shame colliding. I continued, my tone calm but steady. "You said that paying for my education would make me weak, that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I smiled faintly. You were right. Independence did make me strong. Strong enough to sit here today and decide whether or not to help the people who turned their backs on me. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that rearranges power. My brother shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could tell he wanted to speak, maybe to defend himself, but he didn't. He'd always been the beneficiary of their favoritism, the one who never questioned the fairness of it. Now, he looked smaller than I remembered. A shadow of the golden boy who once mocked my part-time jobs. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were wrong," she whispered. "You didn't deserve that. We thought we were teaching you responsibility, but we pushed you away." Her regret was genuine. I could feel it. And for a second, my chest ached with something like the memory of love, faint but still alive somewhere deep down. But I didn't let it soften me completely. I'd learned that forgiveness and self-respect aren't opposites. They can coexist, but only if earned. I leaned forward slightly. "You don't owe me apologies," I said quietly. "Life already took care of that balance." I gestured around the office, the glass walls, the view, the empire I'd built from scraps. "Everything I have came from the lessons you taught me. Maybe not in the way you intended, but I did learn independence. I just learned what it really means." My father exhaled, a slow, hollow sound. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice trembling with something like awe. "Better than we ever imagined." There was no resentment in me anymore, just a quiet sense of completion. For so long I'd wanted them to see me, to acknowledge what they'd done. Now they finally did, and it no longer defined me. I stood up, walking toward the window. The city stretched beneath us, vast, indifferent, alive. "You know," I said softly, "independence isn't just surviving alone. It's forgiving without forgetting. It's knowing you could destroy someone, and choosing not to." My mother wiped her tears. My father stared at the floor. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years. I turned back to them and smiled, calm and steady. "I'll have my team review your proposal," I said. "If it's viable, we'll move forward, professionally, no drama. No revenge speech, just boundaries wrapped in grace." That was the true victory. As they rose to leave, my father stopped by the door, looking smaller somehow. "You really did become strong," he said quietly. I nodded. "You were right about that," I replied. "Independence did make me strong, just not in the way you imagined." They left without another word, and as the door clicked shut, the air felt different. Not triumphant, just clean. The sweetest revenge, I realized, isn't power or wealth. It's peace. The next morning, I arrived early, the city still stretching awake beneath a pale sky. The documents lay neatly on my desk, the ink still fresh, the future folded neatly between the pages. I'd spent the night thinking, not about revenge, but about legacy. What kind of person would I be if I turned into the same cold figure who once turned me away? So I made a decision. I would help, but not as a daughter seeking reconciliation. I would help as a businesswoman setting terms. When they returned that afternoon, my parents looked smaller, more uncertain. My father clutched his briefcase like it might anchor him. My mother's eyes darted around the office, as if searching for a familiar version of me that no longer existed. I greeted them calmly, professional smile in place, and gestured to the seats across from mine. "I've reviewed your proposal," I began, sliding a folder across the table. "Your company's debts are extensive. Restructuring would require significant capital, more than a simple partnership could fix." My father's face tightened. "So, what are you suggesting?" I looked him straight in the eye. "A buyout." The word hung there, heavy and final. My mother blinked in confusion. "Buyout?" She repeated softly. "Yes," I said. "I'll purchase the company. All existing employees will remain. None of them deserve to lose their livelihoods because of mismanagement. But as for you and your son..." I paused, letting the meaning sink in. "You'll retire, permanently." My father's jaw clenched. "You'd take over our company?" I met his gaze steadily. "Your company is days from bankruptcy. What I'm offering isn't a takeover, it's a rescue. You keep your dignity, your people keep their jobs, and I ensure the business survives. But the name on the documents, the authority, the control, that ends today." He sat back, his pride visibly cracking under the weight of reality. For a long moment, he didn't speak. My mother's eyes glistened again. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice trembling between gratitude and fear. "I do," I said quietly. "Because I know what it's like to have nothing. I won't let your employees face that. But I can't allow sentiment to blind me either. This is business, something you taught me the hard way." My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He understood. Maybe for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be powerless in a room he once controlled. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the pen. My mother placed her hand over his, as if seeking permission from both him and fate. Before they signed, my father looked up at me. "You've really changed," he said, his tone almost admiring, or maybe just tired. I shook my head slightly. "No, Dad. I just stopped trying to earn your approval. I built my own." He hesitated for one last heartbeat, then signed. The sound of the pen scratching across paper felt like the end of a chapter, and the quiet rewriting of another. My mother signed next, her signature shaky, her eyes wet. Claire entered moments later to collect the documents. She glanced between us, sensing the strange weight in the air, then left quietly, closing the door behind her. For a moment, none of us moved. My parents sat there staring at the papers, at the symbolic exchange of everything they once held above me. Their company, their pride, their control, all transferred to the daughter they once told to learn independence. I stood, walking around the table, and gently placed a copy of the signed contract before them. "It's official," I said softly. "From today, the company is under my management. You'll receive your retirement package within the month." My mother nodded faintly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. My father simply lowered his gaze. There was no satisfaction in watching them break, only a quiet, almost painful clarity. Independence had brought me here, yes, but compassion kept me human. As they rose to leave, my mother hesitated at the door. "You could have destroyed us," she said softly. "But you didn't," I met her eyes. "You taught me strength," I replied. "I just learned to use it differently." They nodded and walked out, slower, quieter than they had entered. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled. I looked at the papers, the signatures, the ink sealing the final shift of power. Years of pain had come full circle, not with revenge, but with resolution. And just like that, their signature ended our old family dynamic. I hadn't driven down that road in almost a decade. The trees seemed shorter, the sidewalks narrower, as if time itself had shrunk the world that once felt too big for me. The closer I got to the house, the slower I drove. My reflection in the car window wasn't the same girl who left with a single bag and tear-stained cheeks. This time, I was coming back on my own terms. The gate was rusted, half hanging from its hinges. The lawn was overgrown, wild, defiant. Like it, too, had stopped caring about keeping up appearances. The house stood there, faded but familiar. My childhood home, my exile, my starting point. I unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned, echoing through the emptiness. Dust floated lazily in streaks of sunlight that cut across the worn floors. Every creak beneath my shoes whispered pieces of the past. My father's stern lectures about discipline. My mother's sighs when I didn't meet their expectations. My brother's laughter from upstairs. Now there was only silence. I walked slowly through the hallway, my fingertips grazing the peeling wallpaper. The smell of old wood and faint memories lingered in the air. I paused in the living room, where the infamous conversation had happened, the day they said no. The dining table was gone, but I could still picture my father's face as he told me to be independent. I could still feel the sting of my mother's quiet agreement. But instead of anger, I felt something lighter. Gratitude, maybe, or peace. I had carried their words for years like chains. And yet, here I was, standing free inside the place that once broke me. When I reached my old bedroom, the air felt different, softer, untouched. The posters were gone, but faint tape marks remained on the walls. My desk, still dented from late-night study sessions, sat in the corner. I walked over and opened the window. A breeze swept through, cool and gentle, carrying the scent of rain from miles away. I leaned against the sill and closed my eyes. I could almost see that younger version of myself, hunched over homework, crying quietly into textbooks, wondering why she wasn't enough. I wanted to tell her everything, that she would survive, that her pain would become her power, that independence wasn't punishment, it was preparation. There was no need for speeches, no tears left to shed. The walls that once heard my shame now echoed strength. I wasn't there to relive anything. I was there to release it. Later, as I stood in the front yard, I called my lawyer. "I've made a decision about the property," I said. "Sell the land, but keep this house. I want part of the funds to go into a scholarship program." He paused. "For what kind of students?" "For kids like me," I said. "The ones who were told no. The ones whose families couldn't, or wouldn't, help them chase their dreams." He smiled through the phone. "You're turning pain into purpose." "Something like that," I replied, glancing up at the faded roofline. "Call it closure with dividends." The idea felt right. The house that once represented rejection would now stand for opportunity. I imagined students walking across graduation stages, funded by what used to be my burden. Independence reborn as empowerment, the perfect ending to a story that had started in silence and defiance. Before leaving, I took one last walk around the backyard. The swing my brother and I had once shared hung crooked, its chains rusted. I brushed my hand against it, smiling faintly. For years, I thought this place defined my worth. Now it was just a location, one chapter among many. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered, "Thank you." Not to my parents, not even to the house, but to the version of me who never gave up. Driving away, I didn't look back. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind a bend of trees. I felt no urge to return, no need to prove anything. The revenge, the success, the recognition, they had all been milestones. But this was transformation. Independence wasn't about standing alone anymore. It was about reaching back, lifting others, turning pain into progress. The girl who once begged for help had become the woman who created it for others. As the city skyline reappeared ahead, sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding the road in gold. I rolled down the window, letting the wind carry away the last traces of the past. I had come full circle, not to erase where I began, but to honor how far I'd come. It's strange how time softens even the sharpest edges. Months after I turned my childhood home into a scholarship foundation, my company hosted its annual charity gala, an event meant to celebrate growth, giving, and second chances. I didn't expect my father to be there, but life, I've learned, has a way of completing its own circles. The ballroom shimmered with golden light. Laughter, music, and the soft hum of conversation filled the space. Reporters hovered near the stage, investors clinked glasses, and young scholarship recipients mingled shyly near the back. I stood near the podium, smiling as I watched them, the students who reminded me of everything I once was. That's when I saw him. My father stood near the entrance. Thinner than I remembered, his once commanding posture now slightly stooped. He wasn't wearing one of his tailored suits, just a modest blazer and a tired expression that carried years of unspoken reckoning. For a moment I froze, unsure whether to walk toward him or pretend I hadn't noticed. But he made the first move. He approached slowly, each step careful, as if crossing not just the room, but the years between us. When he stopped in front of me, the crowd seemed to fade. His eyes, once sharp, critical, unreadable, now held something I'd never seen before. Humility. "You really did thank us later," he said softly, almost a whisper. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a full acknowledgement, but it didn't need to be. Those 5 words carried the weight of everything he couldn't say. The regret, the pride, the realization that his version of independence had nearly broken me, yet somehow made me whole. I nodded politely, my expression calm. "Maybe I did," I replied, my voice steady. He smiled faintly, the kind that trembles at the corners, then looked around the room, at the banners that bore my company's name, the scholarship recipients laughing near the buffet, the quiet power of everything I had built. His eyes softened, and for the first time, I think he truly saw me, not as his daughter who defied him, but as the woman who had become everything he once underestimated. "Your mother wanted to come," he murmured, still not meeting my gaze. "She thought it might be uncomfortable." I gave a small smile. "It's all right. Some things take time." He nodded, as if relieved that I wasn't angry, or maybe just grateful that I wasn't cruel. We stood there for a while, not talking, just existing in a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. A silence that had once been filled with judgment was now simply peace. When the music shifted to something slower, I turned toward the stage to make my closing speech. My father stepped back, watching as the lights dimmed and the spotlight found me. I spoke about resilience, about how independence isn't isolation. It's learning to stand tall so you can lift others. I told the story of the scholarship fund, without names, without bitterness, and when I ended with the words, "Sometimes, the people who break you are the ones who unknowingly teach you how to rebuild," I caught sight of him wiping the corner of his eye. When the applause rose, he was gone, but that was enough. After the event, as the ballroom emptied and the noise faded into the night, I stepped outside into the cool air. The city lights shimmered in the glass towers around me, reflections of everything I'd endured and everything I'd become. I thought about that 18-year-old girl who left home with a single bag and no plan. I thought about the nights spent crying over instant noodles, the professor who believed in me, the quiet victories that led to this moment. It had all come full circle, from rejection to redemption, from silence to strength. And standing there under the streetlights, I realized something simple yet profound. Peace was never about making them understand. It was about no longer needing them to. It's funny how pain ages with you. It doesn't vanish. It just changes shape, like an old scar that no longer hurts but still reminds you where you've been. When I look back now, I realize my story wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation, the quiet kind that happens when the world expects you to fall and you learn to fly instead. I used to think independence was punishment, that when my parents refused to help me, they were cutting me off from love, from security, from belonging. But now I see it differently. They didn't give me independence. They forced it on me, and in doing so, gave me the one thing they never understood: power. Their rejection became my fuel. Every no turned into late-night study sessions, double shifts, silent tears, and the grit that no classroom could teach. When my friends partied, I planned. When others doubted, I delivered. When life cornered me, I built doors. Every moment they turned their backs, I faced forward. Alone, yes, but stronger for it. And their silence, oh, that silence, became its own kind of teacher. It taught me how to listen to myself, how to stop begging for validation from people too blind to see my worth, how to fill my own cup when no one offered a drop. There's a brutal beauty in being unseen. It forces you to define yourself without reflection, to craft your own light in darkness. For years, I mistook their actions for cruelty. Now I understand. They were just small people acting out of fear, not wisdom. Maybe they believed toughness would prepare me for the world. Maybe they simply didn't know another way. Whatever their reasons, the result was the same. They built the very woman they once dismissed. Independence became my inheritance. It paid for my education when they wouldn't. It fed me when my stomach growled. It became the language I spoke when no one else believed in me. And eventually, it became the foundation of everything I created. My company, my peace, my purpose. Sometimes I still imagine that 18-year-old version of myself sitting at that dining table, hearing the words, "You'll thank us later." I wish I could tell her not to cry. That one day she'll understand those words better than they ever did. That one day she'll stand tall. Not because they were right, but because she made herself right. Because that's what independence really is. Not surviving despite others, but thriving because you decided your worth was never theirs to define. Their lessons came wrapped in pain, but they were still lessons. Their rejection taught me resilience. Their indifference taught me grace. And their absence, that taught me presence. In the end, I didn't need to prove them wrong. I just needed to live well enough that their doubt no longer mattered. So yes, they wanted me to survive without them. Final line, thumbnail caption. They wanted me to survive without them. So I did, better than they ever imagined.